Events like this can serve as a timely reminder for a lot of showgoers that not only can Australia easily feed itself, but through agricultural exports, tens of millions overseas as well. Some believe that as the world's hungry population increases, countries like Australia risk losing control of their food resources. Andrew Robertson prepared this report as part of a multimedia ABC special, Selling the Farm.
The world's population is tipped to nearly double in the next 50 years. Feeding all those extra people is going to become a massive challenge. With well over 1 billion people already, China is one of a number of countries aggressively buying agricultural assets around the world to shore up its food supplies. The issue has come to a head in New Zealand, where a Chinese-owned company called Natural Dairy is offering around $200 million to buy 16 dairy farms which have fallen into receivership. It's the first part of a $1.5 billion plan for Natural Dairy to control a large part of New Zealand milk production, all the way from the farm gate to Chinese supermarkets. The Prime Minister is among those raising concerns.
As a broader principle, looking forward 5-10 years into the future, I'd hate seeing New Zealanders as tenants in their own country, and that is a risk, I think, if we sell out our entire productive base. So that's something the government will have to consider.
We're going to add a minimum, in the short term, of $100 million to New Zealand's exports by putting an added value product like UHT milk and infant formula. We're going to add about, I think it's about 132 more jobs. And then, of course, there's increased tax take that's going to come from this for the government.
New Zealand farmers aren't persuaded, though. They believe China should not be allowed to buy land in their country.
The concern we have is that giving this freehold title to foreign owners without the chance of having that reciprocity. I mean, Fonterra, a major company in New Zealand, can only lease land in China. It can't buy it, and I think that's perhaps what we should be offering here, is a lease.
The New Zealand government has the power to block the Natural Dairy deal if it chooses to. However, that's not the case in Australia.
Under the present arrangements, you could go down the Murrumbidgee River in Riverina and buy every property without ringing an alarm bell.
The reason is that overseas purchases of agricultural land are only subject to the Foreign Investment Review Board monetary thresholds. The minimum threshold for board approval of a purchase is $231 million, well above the value of nearly every farm in the country. The New Zealand Overseas Investment Office, which is the equivalent of Australia's Foreign Investment Review Board, operates under a different model for the purchase of rural land. Under the legislation in New Zealand, rural land is classified as sensitive land, which gives the government the power of veto no matter how big or small the monetary value of the transaction. However, even the farmers who oppose a sale to China can see the risks in the key government rejecting the Natural Dairy purchase.
I do not want to spook the capital markets because, in fact, we are very capital thin in this country at the moment. There isn't a lot of investment occurring from within New Zealand. We need the foreign capital flows to be maintained.
In other words, even if Australia brought its legislation into line with New Zealand, there are no easy solutions to the growing foreign interest in our food assets. In a country as steeped in farming as Australia, food security is not a hot-button topic. But according to experts who've studied the issues, such as the University of Technology's Professor Julian Cribb, the clock is ticking.
It is more important, in my view, than the global financial crisis, because you can do without money at a pinch, you can't do without food. It's probably more urgent than the global climatic issues, because they're going to take a long time to build up in the background. This is something that is going to happen within a generation.
In his new book, The Coming Famine, Professor Cribb paints a bleak picture of a planet where food is in very short supply. The world's population is tipped to hit 9 billion by 2050 and 11 billion just 10 years later. Food production will need to double, but many countries will be left behind, particularly those like China, which is already feeling the strain of feeding its current inhabitants.
Well, I once asked that question to some Chinese academics. I asked them what the carrying capacity of China was in the long term, and they said they thought about 640 million people. And this is against a peak population in China of the order of 1.6, 1.8 billion people. So for a period of time, China is going to have to feed probably around about 3 times as many people as it can carry in the long run.
According to Professor Cribb, this shortage of food is going to have serious implications for countries like Australia.
Australia has always had foreign ownership of some of its food assets, but in time to come, as countries become more and more nervous about their own food security, we will see much increasing emphasis on trying to acquire Australian food assets.
The evidence suggests that process is already underway. Just this month, Singapore-based Wilmar outbid China's Bright Foods to buy CSR's sucrage and sugar division. At $1.8 billion, that deal is being heavily scrutinised by the Foreign Investment Review Board, but others are not. An increasing number of prime Australian farms are being purchased by overseas companies. For example, Victoria's largest land sale this year was the transfer of the Mount Elephant station in the west of the state to a company in Sweden. The Packer family has sold 17 properties to a British private equity firm. The American pastoral giant Westchester has paid $40 million for properties at Moree in New South Wales and Glenfine in Victoria, whilst a company registered in Bahrain is running its eye over the vast Cubby station in southeast Queensland. Bill Heffernan is the chairman of the Senate inquiry into food production. He shares Professor Julian Cribb's concerns about the surge in foreign investment in Australian agricultural assets.
We're asleep in Australia to the fact that a lot of places around the world, such as China, India and the Arab states, are looking at where they're going to be in 40 or 50 years' time, and they're making provision now for their food task in the future.
Which, according to Bill Heffernan, eventually could see Australian farmers becoming tenants in their own country.
Because we are an attractive destination for safe capital investment, we will lose control of our destiny to outsiders, and the worst of that will be government outsiders.
A look at the Tasmanian dairy industry provides some salutary insights.
It's actually costing us to go to work. We're actually going to work, doing our job, and at the end of the day we're getting a bill for doing our job. How many people do you know that do that? No one.
In the Apple Isle, dairy farmers have had enough. Their industry is dominated by two foreign-owned companies, New Zealand's Fonterra and Japan's Kirin. Milk prices at the farm gate have been slashed to the point where farmers say they can no longer make a profit.
We've been milking 25 years and our farm is really our super fund, like a lot of farmers, and we're just seeing that going down the drain.
For Bill Heffernan, it's a classic case of how Australians can be the big losers when foreign investment is allowed to go unchecked.
I chaired the milk inquiry in Tasmania as well, you see. Took evidence down there and like 26 cents a litre. Can I tell your viewers that this is a con job on farmers?
The irony is that although foreign investment has contributed to the plight of Tasmanian dairy farmers, for many of them foreign investment could also be the only hope of escape. With no Australian buyers coming forward for their farms, estate agents are hawking them overseas. One agent alone has 40 farms she's trying to sell in China.
No one wants to see our farms sold out to another country. There's not one of us want to see that. But what do? Do we sit back with our hands tied and go broke and lose everything?
The answer for many people connected with agricultural industries is for Australia's foreign investment laws to be tightened.